This video is brought to you by azamsharp.school, which is one of the biggest producers of iOS development videos. I mean, just check out this. 16 courses, more than 90 hours of videos, more than 90 hours of content, and it just keeps on increasing. So by the time you're watching these, it might be like 20 courses with 120 hours, all right? And now on Azam School, I do offer the annual membership, which is $249, and monthly membership, $25 a month. And what's great about these membership options is that once you sign up for these membership, you can access to all 16 courses. And check out these amazing courses: test-driven development in iOS, reactive programming combined, Swift Vapor, server-driven UI, Reality Kit, Swift Data Bootcamp. I mean, it just contains all the things that you need to become an amazing iOS developer. And I keep on adding more courses. So there are more courses that will be added later on. So this is an amazing deal. You can check out the testimonials from our existing students. And this is again one of the largest catalog for iOS development courses. So sign up for either a monthly membership or annual membership and enjoy all of these courses. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get back to the video. In this module, we'll be talking about a brand new feature called async sequences. Let's go ahead and take a look at a very practical example of why we need async sequences. Let's say that if we are using a regular sequence to iterate through an images. So we have ID of images and we're using those IDs to fetch images. And then finally, those images have to be displayed in our iPhone screen. So the first step will be to loop through the IDs and get the appropriate images. We will wait for all the different images to be populated in an array. And finally, we will go ahead and refresh the user interface with the images. Keep in mind that in this particular case, there will be a very big delay for the user to see the images on the screen, because all the images have to be downloaded first and then has to be transferred to the UI. Now you can use async and await in this case. If you're waiting for all the images to be downloaded, you're still waiting. The other approach is using the async sequence feature, which means that you will have the iPhone app. You're going to go ahead and download the images in the loop using the IDs, but you will be able to iterate through those different async return values. This means that as soon as you get the values, it is awaited, and as soon as you get the value, you will hand it over to the UI. So there is no wait time to go through all the images and wait for all the images to be downloaded. You're handling the images or giving it to the user interface as soon as you receive the image. This experience is called progressive download, and the users will experience it. The user will see the UI refresh instantly, even though the downloading images are being downloaded, but they will start to see something on the UI. As the images are downloaded, they will be visible on the UI. And this is possible by using async sequences. Now let's go ahead and jump into async sequence and see that how we can utilize this new feature. All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to do in this lecture is going to create a sequence, and that sequence is going to allow us read the contents of a CSV file. The CSV file that we'll be taking a look into will be the earthquake data. This example is taken from the WWDC Meet Async sequence example. So what if we want to read all of this data and we want to iterate through it? In order to iterate through this data, which is a comma-separated file, we will have to create a sequence. Not async sequence for now, just a sequence. So how would we start? The first thing we will do is create our URL. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to go ahead and get the URL for that earthquake data. You can see that it is a CSV file, with a lot of data. If I want to iterate through this, most probably there are different options. I can go ahead and expose all lines function on the URL itself. So I'm going to go ahead and create an extension for a URL. Keep in mind that in this lecture, we are not going to cover async sequence. We are going to look at plain sequence, and then you will understand why do we need and what will be the benefits of using async sequence. So we're creating an extension on the URL, and this particular extension will allow us to call one function called all lines. This is an async function, and it is going to return us lines. Lines itself is a sequence. We still have to define it. We will go ahead and pass in a URL to it. Now let's go ahead and define lines. Lines is our structure, which is of type sequence. If it needs to be a sequence, it needs to create a function called makeIterator. Great. For lines also, we're going to go ahead and pass in the URL. Inside the makeIterator, we're going to go ahead and download the data. So this can be done in many different ways. We are going to use the string function contents of URL, and we are going to download the data, split it by new line. Once we have downloaded the data, we will go ahead and return our lines iterator, which doesn't really exist right now. This will be our main iterator that we will have to create, and we will go ahead and pass in the lines. Now let's go ahead and create the lines iterator. Lines iterator will be conforming to the iterator protocol. In order to conform to the iterator protocol, we must implement the next function, which is going to identify that what element we will be returning next. We're going to check if the lines is empty. Well, we don't have access to lines, I guess, but we will have to go ahead and say var lines, which is a string.subsequence, because on line number 14, it is going to create a subsequence. We're going to pass in the lines, as you can see right over here, as a subsequence. Another thing that we are going to define will be a type alias element. This will be the element type that we'll be returning from the lines iterator. If lines is empty, then we can simply go ahead and return nil. However, if the lines are not empty, then we will return one of the elements. Which one? Well, the first one. So we will simply say remove first. Remove first is not only going to remove the element or that particular line from the lines, but it is also going to return. Since this is changing the lines array, we have to make sure that our function next is mutating function. And that's going to fix that problem. Now let's go ahead and try to see that how we can use our new all lines function, which is an async function. Since it's an async, we need to create a task closure, so we can call async. Next, we can go ahead and say for line in endpoint URL.allLines, but since this all lines is an async function, we have to await for it. We will get the line and we will print it out. Just by looking at it, you can already see the problem. The problem over here is that all endpoint URL.allLines is marked with await. This means that all of the data needs to be downloaded first, and then the loop will be simply awaiting till all the data is downloaded. Once the data is downloaded, then we are going to go ahead and print line by line. So let's go ahead and run it. You'll see that when we run it, there is a big pause at the start of the application, and then it allows us to iterate. That big pause that is going on is due to the fact that it is downloading the data, all of the data from the URL that we have. Once the data has been downloaded, then we are able to iterate through it. Let's go ahead and try to run this again. I'm going to go ahead and clear this up. Let's see if it allows us to clear up. Here we go. And now let's go ahead and run it again. You will notice that whenever we run it, there is an initial pause. And then all the data just comes in. So once again, that initial pause is because of the await. Endpoint URL.allLines is simply awaiting the result. And once we have downloaded all the data from the URL, from the CSV file, only then we're able to iterate through it. It would be much nicer if we are able to iterate the data as it is available instead of downloading all the data at once. And that is exactly what the async sequence allows us to do. Now let's go ahead and use the new features of the URL, which already contains properties that will allow us to do async sequence. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the async sequence. Luckily for us, URL structure already has the async sequence available. Let's take a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and comment out our own sequence that we created and going to run a loop for try await. You can see that try await is now a different place, and the reason that we are using try await is that the sequence that is in endpoint URL, let's go ahead and check it out, .lines, you can see the lines property over here will return you an async sequence. And one of the members of that particular sequence, one item, can actually throw an error. So that's why we are using try await. And this is going to give us access to a particular line. So you can see that the try await is now moved, or await is now moved before the line, because we are going to be waiting. As soon as that particular async call is done, we will have access to it. Now we have to make sure that we are in an async context in order to run or await for it. So we are again going to use the task, which was used to be called async. We're just going to put this in an unstructured concurrency. There we go. And now if I go ahead and run this, you will notice that we don't really wait for the whole data to be downloaded. The data is downloaded, and as the data is downloading, we are going through it. So if I run this, you will be able to see that all this happens very, very quickly. So we didn't really have a big pause in the middle where the data was actually being downloaded. As the data was available, as each line was available, we were able to capture that line and we were able to process that line. So this is definitely much more faster than waiting for a lot of data to be downloaded. And inside this for loop, you can perform any different action on the line itself. You can say over here if the contents of the line or the length of the line is this much characters, you can break the loop. You can also continue the loop, which means that you're not interested in that result. So there's a lot of things you can still do inside the for loop if you plan to do that. So that's the main concept of async sequence. Async sequence is also available in many different other places like notifications, and you can already see it's in URLs. It's also available in the URL session. So let's go ahead and check out some of the built-in places in our framework in the language Swift itself where async sequence is being used. In the last few lectures, we looked at different ways that we can use async sequence, and we saw that the URL structure, which is part of the Swift language and the Swift library, it already contains the lines property that is going to return you async sequence. But there are some other APIs in Swift for iOS 15 that also use async sequence. This includes file handle, URL session, and even notifications. This means that all of these different URLs which are returning from their functions async sequence, you can use many of the known functions like map, max, prefix, join, first, zip, compact map, flat map. All of these functions you can use because they are from async sequence, which means this is kind of like a sequence, and sequence contain all of these helper functions, which means async sequence can also use those. All of this list is taken from WWDC 2021 session Meet Async Sequence. Now let's go ahead and take a look at each of these built-in APIs that is returning you an async sequence. Let's go ahead and take a look at our first one, which is the file handle. In order for the file handle to work, we need to create a file so we can read a file. I have already created a customers.txt file which contains a couple of different names. Now let's go ahead and try to read the file in terms of their bytes. The first thing we will need is we need an access to our paths. So we're saying that in the resources text directory nil is just going to find out the customers file, which is a text file inside our main bundle. Next, we can go ahead and create our file handle object by using file handle and providing it a reading path. We already have the path. I can go ahead and put it at 0 location. And now we can go ahead and perform the try await, which is going to allow us to read bytes from the file handle. So file handle dot bytes, and now we can go ahead and print out the line. Since we're using await in this case, we have to make sure that we are calling the task and we are creating this unstructured concurrency. There we go. Next, we are going to go ahead and run this, and you will see that it will simply print out the bytes from the customers.txt file. Nothing really crazy. We're just trying to show you that you can go ahead and perform an async sequence and iterate over it using the file handle. The other one that we have already seen is the one that uses the URL. The URL now contains a lines property that we can use. We have already used this before, url.lines property, that is going to allow us to give a sequence as it is being read. Also, the URL session have been improved, and now URL session contains a bytes property that can allow us to read a particular sequence. You can see over here we are running URL, which is google.com, and we use the bytes property, and then we are able to iterate through the bytes and wait for the bytes as they are available. If I go ahead and run this, it's simply going to go ahead and print out all the bytes, just like we were doing it with some other case. So here are all the bytes. The async sequence is also available in notifications. So let's go ahead and create our notifications. I'm going to go ahead and create a task. Inside the task, we're going to go ahead and say center, which will be the notification center.default. And what we want to do with our notification is that we want to listen or wait for our first notification where a key is some sort of a value. So we can actually do that now. We can simply say await for notification center.notification. We will listen for a special kind of notification, which will be a did enter background, but you can listen to anything you want. And if that notification actually happens and we're waiting for it, and the first notification where this particular condition is true, it will return us a certain value. So we will use a guard statement, let key, we will get the notification user info object from the user info, we are going to go ahead and get the value of a key. And this is all made up stuff. There is no key right now that we use. Once we get that, we're going to go ahead and try to wrap this around so that we can perform a regular string casting. Else, if it doesn't work, then we will simply go ahead and return false. So this particular line is also going to unwrap for us. So key over here will be a string. And in the final line, we can check over here that if a key is a particular value or not. So if a key is some value, then we will return a true value, and that particular item will be, or that notification will be the one that's selected. So you can see over here that notification are also gaining async and await feature. They are also gaining the async sequence because this is kind of like listening to a sequence that we're doing. All right. So there are a lot of built-in functions that we can use, or built-in places where the notifications can be used. Now let's go ahead and take a look at a scenario where we have existing callbacks or handlers, and how can we go about converting them to use async sequences. Let's go ahead and talk about scenarios where it will be a good idea to adapt the async sequence in your existing application, in your existing code. So first we're going to go ahead and create something that is not using a async sequence, and then we are going to go ahead and change that into, or expose that as a async sequence. I'm going to go ahead and create a class called Bitcoin Price Monitor. This particular class is going to give us at regular intervals the change or the updated Bitcoin price. We're going to go ahead and create a price variable that will be of double, and we'll start with 0. I'm also going to go ahead and create a timer, which will be of timer because we want it to be at regular scheduled interval of, let's say, 1 second. I'm also going to go ahead and create a price handler. That is going to be a closure, which is going to give us the actual double value, the actual price, and it's not going to return anything. And we will initialize it with an empty body. Next, what we want to do is to create multiple functions. These multiple functions are going to allow us to start the updating and stop the updating of the values. So I'm going to go ahead and create a function called start updating. In this, we are going to go ahead and use the schedule time interval, the one that takes in the actual target. Time interval is going to be, let's say, 1 second. The target will be self, which is the instance of the Bitcoin Price Monitor class. The selector would be a Objective-C function that we're going to pass in, or we're going to call that, which is going to call getPrice. This is still the timer, it's still in the selector. These are still things in Objective-C, so that's why we have to use the selector. And next step, for user info, we're not really passing anything. And for repeat, we're going to go ahead and say true. So it will keep on repeating. Currently, we don't really have any function called getPrice. So let's go ahead and create a function, getPrice. Inside the get function, we are going to go ahead and call our price handler, where we will simply go ahead and create some sort of a random value in a particular range of, let's say, 20,000, including 40,000. We also have to make sure that we are calling this or marking this with Objective-C because this is one of the selectors, kind of like the old code trying to talk to the new code. We will also have another function called stop updating. And in stop updating, I will simply go ahead and invalidate the timer so it can go away. So now as you can see that we have created a Bitcoin price monitor. What happens if I try to create an instance of Bitcoin price monitor? So I'm going to go ahead and say Bitcoin price monitor, which is Octave Bitcoin price monitor. So the instance is created. I can go ahead and also hook up the price handler. This is going to give us the actual price, and I should be able to just go ahead and print out the price. And finally, I will go ahead and call the start updating function so I can get the new values. Whenever I call the start updating function, the handler is going to get called, and then it will simply print out the new price. This will be all random pricing, not the real pricing of Bitcoin, between 20,000 and 40,000, because that is the range that we have provided. Now you can see the application is running, and it is giving us some random values, and it's not going to stop. So let's go ahead and make sure that we are stopping this. And set to manual. Great. Everything is working, but wouldn't it be nice if we can somehow expose our Bitcoin price monitor as an async stream? And we can. So let's go ahead and see that how we can do that. I'm going to comment out this code because we won't be needing this. In order to use async sequence and expose our Bitcoin price monitor as an async sequence, we are going to use async stream. We also have to provide and say that what kind of a thing that we will be returning from the stream. So right now I'm just going to say that it is going to return double type. We will get access to something called a continuation. Continuation is just a closure which allows you to yield. So it will have function like yield and maybe even terminate. This is going to return us the actual Bitcoin monitor stream. So Bitcoin stream. Probably we should call it Bitcoin price stream. Next, inside this closure, we're going to go ahead and create a Bitcoin price monitor, which we have done previously also. This is going to be a Bitcoin price monitor. And we will go ahead and say price handler equals to, whenever we get the price, we will use the continuation to yield that particular value. Yield means that it's just going to give you the value, even though that it is still yielding. It is still giving us those values. We're yielding it. This means that you can access it. And finally, don't forget to call Bitcoin price monitor dot start updating. The continuation also does have another thing, which is continuation dot on termination. And you can see that it is marked with sendables. This means that inside the on termination, you're not really allowed to change anything. So you can definitely look into that. I haven't really tried out the on termination thing, but that is one thing that as a closure, it's going to give you an async stream of double, and it's not going to return anything. This is one of those places that you can go ahead and call the termination part. If I go ahead and implement it right now, you'll see that it is calling some weird stuff. Basically, it's saying that converting a non-concurrent function to sendable may introduce data races. At this point, I don't know how to solve this particular problem, so I'm not going to use termination. If you do know how to solve this problem, let me know so I can add a future video explaining the solution to this problem. Next, we have done the start updating. So this is the stream that we have created, and it is going to start returning us the updated Bitcoin prices. Now we can go ahead and await for them. So await Bitcoin price in the Bitcoin stream. And now we can simply go ahead and print out the Bitcoin price. Now, if I go ahead and run this, I will get the same exact result, meaning I'm getting the prices, but now you have exposed your old API and you have adapted the new async stream. This means that you have access to all the cool stuff that the stream does, which means that you can perform filters, you can perform map, flat map, compact map, first and all of those drop first, drop last, all the different array helpers are available to you. So you can use anything that you really want. So that's one of the biggest advantages you are going to get by exposing or by adapting the async stream in your existing code. And you can access all of those different array helpers by simply checking out the stream, and you can see drop first, filter, prefix, first, contains, make, compact, all certified. A lot of stuff is actually available to you because in the end it is a special kind of a stream sequence, which is async sequence. So I hope that you have really enjoyed this video and it gives you an idea of you can use the async streams to replace all of the existing code that you have, which was marked or which was using callbacks. Async stream can also be a replacement for a lot of the combined code that you have written. So if you have a lot of combined and reactive programming, you can use async stream to kind of replace all of that stuff in the future.